Hi Sven, thanks to be here to speak about school and teaching.
Hi, good to be here.
I will start with a strange question. Could you say why you became a teacher?
I think at first it was a desire to give back to my society, or rather to equalize some sort of debt that felt I owed society. I grew up in South Africa in a privileged middle class family, and I became very aware of inequality in South Africa as I was leaving school and in university. And I was carrying a lot of guilt, white South African guilt, as many white South Africans carry. And I think the major inspiration at first was to try and come to terms and with those feelings of guilt by serving the society, by teaching in schools in poor areas.
So mainly for gratitude and thankfulness for what you received from the society you want to give back, right?
Yeah.
By the way, you mentioned South Africa, and could you introduce a bit yourself so listener can understand who you are a bit and what you do?
Okay, so my name is Sven Glietenberg, which is a very European and especially very German or Northern European name. I was born, though, in South Africa. My family has been there for a number of generations already, so I would consider myself South African, although I do speak German, and currently I live and work in Germany. I grew up living in many different places. My parents moved around a lot in different countries and different parts of South Africa and Southern Africa. I was always good at school and also into many different things at school, many clubs and societies, usually based around arts. I went to a very special school for a number of years, a music school, and I experienced somewhat of an alternative education. I also had many good teachers that led me to developing passions for things that I still value today. And a lot of my inspiration in teaching comes from the own experiences I had as a student, but also my frustration as a student. I also felt alienated at school quite a lot as well. And so I think I tried to teach in a way that students can relate to and give the good parts of my own education and improve on the bad parts.
Could you give us a couple of examples of alternative education you experienced in your teenagerhood?
Well, the school I went to from the ages of 10 to 15 was a choir school. So in addition to normal academic studies, we did 2 hours of choir singing every day and learned musical instruments, piano. I learned piano and guitar and learned music theory and history of music. So it was really academics and strong education in music. At the same time, also some sport. It was in the countryside in a very beautiful place in the mountains. So we were able to walk freely in a very beautiful natural part of the country. And I think learning a lot of discipline early on. I was in a boarding school. We lived there. We had quite a strict routine. So we had to work very hard, and we were treated, expectations were ahead of us as they would be. They were expected us to perform as professional musicians would perform. We would tour around the country and around the world, and we would do everything. We performed, we set up the stage, we looked after ourselves. And I think that sort of holistic education, both in terms of not only academics, but culture and sport as well as a holistic education in terms of a way of life, a disciplined routine in life, working hard. I think a lot of that is missing in schools, especially the ones I've worked in, that tend to focus only on a small part of people's lives, the academic learning and reading and writing. At the same time, I also attended some very traditional schools, traditional culture influenced by Christianity, very rigid ideas, homophobia, authoritarian systems where we're not encouraged to question the power structures of the school. So I've experienced both what is potential in doing school differently and the sort of normal way of doing school.
So you grew up in South Africa, and then at one point you moved, right, in Germany.
Yeah, I actually moved quite recently, just over a year ago. So I taught for 7 years in South African schools, mostly in high schools, mostly English as a second language in poor areas. And then I taught at university while doing my master's, I was teaching future teachers how to teach English. And then I became more and more disillusioned with mainstream schooling. Whether I was at high school or primary school or university, I found the same conservative and rigid attitude from the people working in education. A very limited way of seeing children, sometimes infantilizing them, not seeing them as having potential to think and behave in ways that adults would, and a lack of imagination for what we could do with young people's time while they're at school. Quite a boring, relying on the standard way of doing lessons. And I became just frustrated with this after meeting it everywhere on all levels of the education system. And so I considered quitting being a teacher for some time, but then decided rather let me go and see if I can attend some alternative schools in Europe where there's a bit more freedom or people are more able to try other ideas. I did some Googling and I found a so-called free democratic school here in Hamburg in Germany. And because I speak German and have German citizenship as well, I could easily get a job here. And that's where I've been for the last year.
After we can compare the two school systems, but since you mentioned the, let's say, narrow-minded of environment you met in the school when you started teaching, I would like to ask you if you tried at least to give yourself an explanation in order to explain that attitude and that way to relate with students you met in that school system.
I think that school is a social institution which has its main purpose of reproducing the society and its power structures. This is especially evident in South Africa when you see that most people who go to schools in poor areas never are able to raise themselves out of their situation. A school, in fact, is one of the things that keeps them in their situation. So people are educated to fit in to the role that they've been born into, the social position that they've been born into. I think that this basic mechanism then filters through in what everybody does, in the way lessons are taught, in the way the curriculum is developed, in the way the assessment system is developed, the mechanism of testing and keeping and then only letting certain people through to the next level. And I think it's possible to work within the system and not follow its rules, but it's difficult. You take a lot of pressure onto yourself if you're a teacher and you're trying to do things differently.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said. In a way, the school and education are instruments in order to preserve the society and the order of the society.
Yeah.
But it's funny because in Europe, at least, I don't know if everywhere, but mostly we have this idea that school should be an opportunity, especially for, the low classes to have a better life. So when you switch, when you moved to Germany, how you found this new system?
Well, I must say that I've only been here for a year and I've only been in one school. And the school that I'm in is not a good example of the majority of schools in Germany. From what I've heard of teachers here, schools are mostly the same as South Africa, and schools in poor areas tend to have the same challenges that schools in poor areas have in South Africa, perhaps slightly less extreme, but in the same way. I think just because the economy is stronger, I think in general that there is more of a chance to improve your social position in this society than there is in South Africa. But I don't think mainstream schools here and mainstream schools in South Africa are very different.
So it's more the economy that makes the difference than the
Yeah, I think it's bigger issues than that make it different. Although I will say now that I'm in a private school here, which is very different from most state schools, although it is state funded, mostly state funded. And at the school where I'm, the students decide what they want to learn. They are not given a curriculum that is standardized for all people of a certain age. They really choose what they want to do every day. Literally, we have an empty timetable that they have at the beginning of every week. And they can fill this timetable with some courses that are on offer, which they can choose to do, or there own free, independent learning time, on their own learning goals that they have decided are important for them. As well as this, the students are much more involved in the day-to-day running of the school. It's a democratic school, so we try to have participation of everybody in decision making as much as possible. All those who are interested in making decisions in a certain area have the opportunity to contribute to those decisions.
That seems very different from the school you described before, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you like this type of school?
There's things I like about it, but I'm also now becoming quite disillusioned with alternative education as well. Now I start to think maybe it's me that's the problem and it's not school, because wherever I go, I'm unsatisfied.
But could you say what you like the most and what you start not liking so much?
Yeah, sure. Well, for the young people, and by the way, in our school, we don't call them children, we call them young people. I think it's part of a philosophy of seeing them, a little bit more equal. We're not under the impression there isn't a hierarchy, and we don't see ourselves as we have a role as adults in the school, and there are certain things we can do that they can't do. But we try more to treat them as young people with responsibilities, with a capacity to make decisions and to have a contribution to serious discussions about things, and also not serious discussions about things. And what I like about it is that with the young people who do have found a passion, something that they like to do, are good at, and want to do more, they have really a lot of time to do this. They're not forced to engage in a lot of things that don't interest them, and they can spend a lot of time really becoming good at something from an early age. I think of, for example, two guys who spend, I think, 2 to 3 hours every day drawing comics, and their style is so sophisticated. I really think they have developed a unique style that they could already be publishing these comics. And I think simply they are able to do this because they have a lot of time to spend on this. I also like that because we don't have like a class structure, we don't bunch them into groups based on their age. There's a little bit more inter-age interaction. You have 7-year-olds interacting with 10-year-olds, 10-year-olds interacting with 15-year-olds, occasionally 15-year-olds interacting with 6-year-olds or 7-year-olds. So there's a little bit more learning from each other. Those two guys who draw comics, for example, I often see a younger 7-year-old sitting with them, and I can see how his style, first he's copying them, but he has so much inspiration from them that he might not have if he was forced to be with people of his same age and development level. It's another nice thing. Maybe I'll move on to some things that frustrate me. I think a lot of the young people, the majority of them, however, don't really know what to do with their time. They spend most of their time at home on computers and computer games, and at school we don't allow them to play computer games, so they're somewhat lost. They have no other interests except for computer games, so they spend a lot of their time talking about computer games at school or playing around. And imaginative play is, of course, also valuable, but they are lost in a world of fantasy, and they are never challenged, confronted with other things. Even the guys who have a passion, I also find a limit in that they are never forced to try and do something that's not that natural and easy to them, because I think there's also a value in doing things that are uncomfortable for you or that you're not that good at. And because we don't really force people to do things that they don't choose, I think they end up being limited by that. A little bit like each is still in their own little world, very concerned with their own likes and dislikes, and maybe not as holistically formed by diverse inputs as you would have in a normal school. I mean, I think the dream of normal schooling is that we expose young people to the arts, to science, to maths, to sport, to all these things, and then they get a general education in everything, and they can start to find what they would like to focus on, but they still have that general education. Whereas our students, I mean, some of them are completely ignorant of everything except for their own area of interest. That, I think, is a major limitation.
So in a way, freedom has a good size, for example, for people or for young students who have already a passion they want to develop, yeah, so they can follow already that direction. But in a way, for other people, other young students that don't know what to do, it can be an excuse to wasting their time and to lose themselves, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So in a way, there is this strange presupposition I tend to see in the school you teach that you are supposed to know already what you wanna be and what you wanna do, which is difficult and very hard at that age, you know.
Yeah, the school is founded on this idea of intrinsic motivation. It must come intrinsically. But really, I even questioned that concept itself. Like, can you say something really comes from yourself? Everything is a reformulation of some influence you've gotten early on in your life from your parents, from your society. Something has sparked, you've experienced, seen something, you've kept it in yourself, and then it comes out, you've been attracted to that. And at our school, if we refuse to give them input on the things we think of as valuable with our greater life experience and our careful thinking about what we think is valuable in life, we are now somehow not allowed to give these things because we must mate for them. What ends up happening is that their intrinsic interests are just to play and to play computer games. A lot of the children are very, it's just pleasure. Pleasure is the main thing. You ask them, why don't you think about doing this? Or I think you should do this, you say to someone. And then the person says, I don't want to. And I ask why. Okay, what's so bad about it? And they always say, it's not fun. It's not fun. I'm not going to have fun. I'm not going to enjoy it, So there's this expectation that something's not fun or not immediately fun. It's not worth doing. Yeah. And then, as you say, I think they will end up being less free because they are limited. They are limited in their exposure to the world. They are limited in their ability to trust themselves in a new area, in their openness, for other things. So it could ironically lead to less free people.
It's funny because you switch from like a very rigid, impositive, and traditional and conservative school system, and now you end up to teach in an opposite school where the freedom is maybe even too much.
Yeah, the freedom is constricting. Yeah, and I think in the end, I'm developing in my mind what I think would be the right ratio of freedom and obligation, if we could call it that. And more, I think maybe 50% of their time should be facilitated, where we give impulses and we teach, we think of things that we think might be valuable, obviously still with choice, still with participation, not to say that we should now tell them everything, do frontal teaching all the time, but let's say teacher-led. And then the other half of their time can be based on the different things they've experienced. Then they can choose their own focus area and they have time to pursue those interests, also with some guidance, but they have sort of a free choice which interest they would like to pursue more.
Have you read, by the way, Emile or On Education by Rousseau?
No, I've read small excerpts of it, but not
because
yet.
It sounds a lot the style of your school. The main idea is that the educator or the teacher must try to influence less possible the guy, the student. There is the idea that the student can learn by himself, by exposing himself to the difficulty of the world, of the nature, in a way.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, but maybe there are also problems in putting in a concrete way that kind of idea.
Yeah, because I think the human nature is to avoid difficulty and change. It's uncomfortable. So yeah, you supposedly expose them to the difficulty, but he'll just become really good at avoiding anything that's difficult and uncomfortable.
Yes, like we say in the practice, our brain behaves a bit like our bum. They both like to be in a comfort place, position. Yeah. So yeah, okay, interesting. But by the way, you teach English, right?
Yeah. So what I teach formally, I have an English course, but most of my time at the school is one-on-one, let me call it coaching. So everybody has their own learning goals, and I meet some of these people every day and I have a discussion, how you're going, what are your challenges, what you want to do next, what are your successes, what are you thinking, try to see how they're thinking, a lot of meta level actually about what they're doing.
You're a mental coach, basically.
Basically, but a lot of the time I feel quite frustrated because I'm more just, I don't know, trying to force them to actually do something or motivate them to do something. A lot of the time I try to have a dialogue where a lot of it is normal stuff that I'm used to as well. A fear of failure, big issue with perfectionism. Maybe it's especially in Germany, but very big issue with kids not wanting to do something because they're not very good at it. Any sort of learning, the definition is that you are doing something you're not good at to get better at it. And if there's a massive blockage to not being good at things, it's not easy to learn. So a lot of the time I'm coaching people through that or encouraging them. Some of them, I just try to help them to find any interest, and to stick with something. They might choose something and then just 2 days later give it up. So it's about just seeing them stick with it, showing them that it's normal to struggle. So that's most of the work. A lot of also what in German we say Erziehung is Bildung and Erziehung. Bildung is like education, whereas Erziehung is raising a person, this behavior. A lot of the work, as I think actually a lot of teaching wherever you are is also about behavior, like in whether you're using carrots or sticks or your own role model, but you're trying to teach people how to behave in society in a social, pro-social way,
But let me understand. So imagine that you propose to one of your students an exercise and he says, no, I don't want to do it because it's not funny and blah, blah, blah. What can you do in that case? I know it sounds strange, but...
Yeah, no, I know. I have to ask this question to myself every day. Well, at the moment, the best strategy I have is to try to, okay, but what could be good about it? Can you think of other things that are valuable, but they're not nice to do? Why don't you try it just once and then let's see how it actually goes? Could it be that you're scared and you don't know what it is? A lot of these are quite rhetorical questions. Ideally, I'd be asking them in a way that's less rhetorical, so less trying to push my agenda on them. Sometimes what I think works best is just to, I've had this conversation with somebody, I see they don't want to do it, and then at another point, I just spring it on them and I just do something with them. I just, in that direction, I just engage them immediately in something, I bring them in and throw them into something, and through that way, they could learn. If it's possible to do that, I think that's good, because sometimes talking about doing a thing brings up all of these habits of their mind, which is fear, anxiety about making mistakes. But if we just get into the doing immediately and then afterwards reflect on it, it can be better. What else do I do? Well, this is one place where I'm in the process of trying to influence the school to change somewhat, because I think we have to oblige people to do some things. I think we have to say, you have to do one thing. You can't just not do any courses. You have to choose at least one course and do it. Even if it's not the funnest thing for you, you got to stick with it for 3 months or something, or we can develop some sort of a system which still has choice in it, but obliges them to commit to something, and not go purely on personal desire.
Yeah, even because the lack of imposition that there are in that school system, in a way, push the teachers to be creative and to find new strategies. But maybe sometimes you have the impression, tell me if it's wrong, that you have to manipulate the student instead of impose something to the student. So maybe the impositions sometimes are more honest than the manipulations.
I do often see myself in that manipulation role. It's stressful because I don't really like to do that. I'd rather say, okay, this is the formal structure. I teach you, you have to come to my class. And then I try to make it appropriate and relevant and interesting for people, or I try to at least engage them. But this thing of quietly trying to convince people and to do things, because they notice it, they notice that I want them to do something. And that's really, it's actually also against the philosophy of the school. And in the versions of this type of school that do it 100%, the teachers really, they don't force people to do anything. If the person comes to school and literally plays for 5 years, it's okay. The idea is that it's fine, they will develop, they will find their own way eventually. I don't know, maybe I'm just too influenced by my own education, which was very structured, to believe in that. I see people just really not doing anything, and of course my value system is present all the time, but I don't think what they're doing most of the time has value. A lot of them, I just see them really, really wasting their time.
Let me propose you this idea that in that school system, there is fear of power.
Yeah.
You are afraid to be powerful and
Yeah.
to use that power in order to help people to do something good.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's got something to do with a style of parenting, even a style of interacting with children, which I'm now in it, and I see the characteristics of it also in the way people engage with their children. The children wants is always right, what the children thinks and their feelings are always, sort of, that is the main priority, is to acknowledge that, or not even acknowledge, but respond to the child's desires and feelings, to respect them. And of course, I'm not saying we should be unaware or ignorant of what children think and feel, but to always then change whatever we're doing because of the child's thought, to me, doesn't make sense. Because often, all human beings are constantly pulled by ideas and emotions and desires, and many of these are not good for them, or good for society. And to think that somehow the feelings that children have are pure or always good is naive, I think. And back to your characterization that it's a fear of power, yes, there's an anxiety about playing a directing role. And I try to think about why this is the case.
Do you think that there is a connection between this kind of very open, maybe too open style of teaching in Germany and what happened in the history, the recent history? In a way, in Germany, you had this problem to impose rules to other people. So in a way, I see that as a reaction of what happened a few years ago.
Sure, yeah, I like that. In Germany, yes, 100%. People are so sensitive of what happens when power is concentrated in the hands of too few, or when power is used in anti-human ways, destructive ways. So this type of education is attractive because of that.
So maybe what can explain these styles could be guilty.
Yeah. I think about what I started the conversation, and I said I got into schooling partly because I was guilty.
Yes, exactly, yes.
And I think I always felt somehow when I was teaching, it's weird because I liked the power. I liked leading a class. I liked sort of channeling this energy, a lot of people in the class, 40 people. And I liked that power of, in a way, conducting, like an orchestra conductor would conduct an orchestra. I enjoyed that role, and I still do. But then the other side of me is anxiety about that, is a shame, insecurity in myself. And whenever people didn't like what I was doing in class, I always took it very personally, and I felt a lot of pressure when I was in that role because it was uncomfortable. And so I think that's why I was attracted to this type of school, is because basically I could work in a school but not teach. And now I find I miss it. And maybe it's also because I have less slowly getting rid of my own feelings of guilt, and I see that it's some sort of personal thing. And as I deal with my personal things about guilt, I don't really feel guilty about exercising my power with other people.
I propose you this idea about power. In order to have a better relation with power, you have to accept that you cannot always or only use the power to do good stuff. You have to accept that even if you don't want, you can do mistakes. Your action can have a bad consequence to other people.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's unbearable.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I think connected to the perfectionism, maybe there's in the same way, there's this fear that we'll hurt a child, or we'll mess them up, or we'll do something wrong. So rather, let's not do anything. Let's just let them develop,
It's a self-sabotage of the system. In a way, maybe hurt, even if you don't want to do it, but if you accept that may happen, even hurt can have a good consequence in some other people's life.
Yeah.
I know it's hard to accept, especially with that history of the country,
Yeah.
of culture, but why not?
Yeah, I think, of course, all of us would say that we have grown from challenges we had where people have hurt us, and we've been able to develop the resources to survive because of that.
And speaking about power, imagine that tomorrow you become the principal of your school. What would you do? What would you change in your school system?
So for the youngest students, I would have a daily set time when 2 hours, let's say in the morning, where they can have a teacher in a certain place who does reading and writing and arithmetic with them, early mathematics with them, so that they can develop a routine, and every day they can come, for half an hour or for 1 hour for the full 2 hours, but they must come to that space every day and do some of the basic skills. It should be an expectation. When you come into school, you must learn the basic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic, because you need these things to be here. You can do it at your own pace, but you must do it. Most of the children do it anyway, but we should have a structure which provides them a good situation in which they can do that. Not a big change. It would be a small change. We might actually have that change, hopefully, in the next few months.
So you would introduce some rules in order to push the student to be there.
Yes.
To do something.
Then for the slightly older ones who have now learned the basic skills, I would require them to have not just one learning goal, but let's say three from different disciplines. One to do with their body, one to do with some sort of intellectual pursuit, and maybe one with a skill they want to learn, a physical skill. So you're expected to have a learning goal in different mediums, or in different areas.
So you would propose more holistic approach in the school.
Yeah. So that everybody is learning a little bit for their mind, a little bit of sport for their healthy body, and a physical skill of some kind. Can even be music playing or building or making something with your hands, but something that is not purely intellectual, Then I would create some sort of a structure where once every 6 months, people will present something that they've learned, or present a skill or share something, but it should be obliged that every 6 months you will share with people some improvement you've made, in one of your areas.
If I understood correctly, they are not obliged now to do some test or presentation.
No, of course, if I'm supporting somebody who's learning mathematics, I can do a test with them so that they can know how they're improving. It can be part of the learning process, sure, but they're not really obliged to do that. And for example, the ones who are writing, nobody ever says, okay, you must now write and finish something and publish your story and share it with other people. There's never expectation that they should do that. And I think that's a little bit of pressure that, I'm not just doing this for me and I can't just hide away and not grow. I'm going to have to account for the time that I've been here, and also to share generosity and a confidence in what you've done, So I would encourage and create some sort of a structure which would provide opportunities for that on a regular basis.
Also, because without text, it must be hard to select students. How can you do the selection? For example, university.
Yeah, so on that matter, as an aside, the students at our school, it only goes up to the end of 9th grade, at which point they can do a test, which comes from the government, and that can let them go to the next level of schooling. If they do that test, they can go. We don't create that test. We can prepare them for it if they choose to do that.
Okay.
Final change I would create would be to also oblige people to do some sort of a collaborative project. So as well as their individual learning goals, they should have one there should maybe an extra one. Let's say they have those 3, then a 4th one should be something collaborative, where they must work with other people also to create something or initiate something, or it doesn't have to be product orientated. It can also just be a process. Maybe they do a course with some other people, but there should be expectation to not only work alone. It's a problem I see at our school, that when it comes to learning or formal learning, they're often just doing their own thing. Of course, outside of that, they hang out with their friends all the time. So I'm not very worried that they're not sociable, but they also don't experience the joy and the potential of creating and thinking with other people.
Your school system is quite common in Germany, or for example, public schools are very different from that?
No, public schools are quite different. They're more what we would, I think, the whole world would consider as normal schools, with a timetable and lessons which you should go to, and
Okay,
1 hour, 1 hour,
it's
1
more
hour.
traditional.
Yes, most schools are like that. Although there's quite a lot of these schools in Germany. I'd say I know there's a union of these schools, and I think there's more than 50 in the country. Yeah, maybe 40 or 50, but there's quite a lot. It's not unheard of, and I know that they are growing. A lot of people are, for whatever reason, sometimes political reasons, sometimes their children, this thing that their children are special and need something else than the traditional schools. A lot of people are now wanting alternative schools.
So your school system is spreading around, basically.
Yeah, I would say it's growing.
Okay.
Different versions with different focuses. Some have a little bit more structure, some have less, some have a focus on digital learning, so a lot of computer work. Some might have a focus on nature and spending a lot of time outside, but more all quite alternative to the traditional school.
After we pointed out many, let's say, criticism of the school system and what you would improve, let me ask you, what the best part of teaching for you? What do you like the most in your job?
I enjoy the creativity and spontaneity, especially of the youngest children, 7, 8 year olds. I really enjoy watching them draw and listening to them talking about what they're drawing and generally creating. I found the youngest students they have such a confidence in their own, in the marks they make on the page, in the story that they're telling. They are only beginning to doubt themselves. It's starting, but it's not as strong as later. People doubt themselves so much and they think, I can't do that, and what my idea is not good, and all of that. But the youngest ones, especially with creative things, there's a strong confidence, and I find it very inspiring and just enjoyable. I laugh a lot at what they suggest and create and things. Yeah. I like also what I'm quite appreciating at this school. I have more time to develop a relationship with people and to see them changing over time. Even I've only been there in 1 year, but to see them developing as people, some of the teenagers a year ago, they were still quite childish. Now I see their interests are changing, the way they interact with other people. And my interest in people is quite satisfied because I can see the way people develop, the way they interact. I find all the basic things of how humans are, you see them, when you work with people, that's what you do every day, is you can see that. If you're not too occupied with your stresses and I have to do this and I have to do that, if you can come into an observational mindset when you're working with children, then it's very interesting. I like that part of it a lot.
So paradoxically, you learn a lot through teaching.
Definitely. Though it doesn't happen on its own. I think you have to always create that mindset almost every day. I have to remind myself, like, I mustn't be too obsessed with doing things right, with forcing people to do things, I must be open to what's all the information that's coming, and also see that I'm in the process that I'm trying to teach them how to learn. I must be in that process myself. And when you make that your sort of main goal, then it's the best thing to do, best place to be if you like learning.
Probably the most important thing you could learn is the lightness of the younger students, like you mentioned before, because in a way, if you see, children worry less than adults. We worry more. We have more responsibilities, but they are more natural and they are more in the present, in the action, what they are doing. So in a way, they can inspire us to be more light.
Yeah, that really helps me.
I have one more question to you. It's about advice you could give to, I don't know, the younger teacher or the, let's say, student that finished university and they are approaching the school. So what would you suggest them?
First advice I can give is write about your experiences at school, even if it's little one paragraph at the end of the day, just to see get that a way of being a teacher that is reflective and analyzing your own work. It helps you to get distance, to not be too, I think many people who are passionate teachers, they can get very heavy and very self-critical and can burn out. And if you have a reflective approach, then you can take a little bit of distance, see that you're also in the learning process, and see that you're also making changes if you're writing a little bit and reflecting on what you're doing. And another thing is, if you're in a traditional school, spend time in the classroom of other people, watch other people teaching, have a discussion about it afterwards, find somebody who can watch you teaching and give you some feedback. Again, then you see yourself more as a learner, and you don't protect your little safe space, and you can really develop more skills. Obviously, you see people doing things, you pick up some techniques from people, and you hear other people's opinion of what you're doing, can really make you see some things you're doing more clearly and develop more.
Let me translate. In a way, you're suggesting, don't think that you already know, but try to keep learning through the teaching. Be open to other styles, other people, methods.
Yeah, I like this Paulo Freire, this Brazilian guy, educationist Paulo Freire. He was quite a, let's say, left-wing guy who thought about education, and he had a concept that a teacher is never just a teacher, it's a teacher-learner, teacher-learner. And then the students are not just learners, they're learner-teachers. So you see that even though you have a role, you at the same time as a teacher, you're also a learner. And even though the students have a role as a student, they also can be teachers. In fact, you'll learn the most from them if you're open to listening to them and observing really their responses. Then you can get the best feedback from them.
Yes, I agree. I must admit that I learned more as a teacher, like 10 years teaching, than 20 years student.
Yeah.
So yeah, even because if you want to teach something, you have to clarify better your ideas in your mind. So in a way, you have to learn again what you already learned in order to translate them to the people who want to learn from you. Yeah. I like the idea that teaching is the best way to learn.
Yeah.
Sven, I am done with the question, but if you would like to add something, a comment or anything, you can do it now.
I enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, it's also always good to talk, and it really made sense, this fear of power, as a way of describing the situation I'm in now. I think I'm going towards something that is more balanced, where it's not a complete dictatorship where you have all the power and you take everything, but it's also not a complete fear of power and relinquishing all the power. It's having power, but knowing when to relax it, knowing when to invite the other person. That availability, I think that's something that I'd like to work toward.
I'm glad that this interview made you think about your, let's say, next goal. You switch from the abuse of power, from the powerless in a way, and now you know that you want a middle stage between these two opposite and extreme positions.
Yeah. Obviously, you'll never get a perfect balance, but to be aware that there's those poles, those potentials, and to find a way to, be in the middle somewhere, and sometimes a little bit more this side, sometimes a little bit more this side, depending on the situation, depending on the people. A lot of it is responding. If you're really open to the reality of what's happening, one student is not the same as another. One needs a certain approach, which might be a bit more directive. Another might need a bit more freedom.
Sven, thank you for sharing your experience. It's been fun. So thank you, and see you around in Zoom or wherever.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea.